Hi there everyone, welcome back to Dandelion Delphi Tutorials. Today we're going to look at a two-dimensional array question. So this is for our grade 12s, and go and download the final of 2016 question 3 and practice it as you are watching the video. This was the interface given to you, and there was a whole bunch of code given as well, but just to understand what they meant in this program, these are terminals that you can enter at a specific water park. The terminals are really like three entrances to this water park, and if you enter at a certain terminal and then choose your direction that you want to walk in, you would then find the activities and facilities of the water park in a specific order, and that was all given with the declaration of the arrays of the program. Code and declaration of variables were already given to you that would store the number 2, for example, if they clicked on terminal 2, and then number 3 if they then chose to walk east. Two parallel one-dimensional arrays were declared as well, and they are determining which activity each character represents. So the first code in array codes is a W, and that then corresponds with the first activity in array activities, which is water park. The second one is an A in the code, and that represents the aquarium. Just note that not all of them have the character, like we have C is S here, but if you have a look at shopping, shopping is represented by an X. But the two arrays are running parallel to each other. And array act codes will look like this, the inside of this, where the rows determine the terminal and then the columns are your directions. So if I'm going in terminal 2, that's row 2, and I want to go south, I am in my 2D array at position 2, 2. And the first part of this question is only asking us to display our two-dimensional arrays with these labels, terminal 1, 2, 3, and then the directions at the top. This is a good question to use your reading time, your 10 minutes that you have before the exam start, to read through this question, because you will see that later on we need to display again. And for that reason, I suggest that you create a display procedure. Press pause and try it yourself. Here is my procedure display, but let's just have a look quickly at how to set tab stops. First of all, I usually do my line of headings to determine how many #9s I am using. And if you look at the output, you will see that there was a tab space before the word north. So therefore I have #9 and then north, #9, south, and so on. So after I have done my headings, I then count my number of #9s, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4. That would now be my tab count. So I set my tab count to the number of #9s that I am using. I then need to space out my tabs. And the first tab will be tab 0, in square brackets also indicating an index. This is my first tab, so this is tab 0. I'm setting tab 0 to 100 because if you have a look at the output here, this is quite a large space. These ones are smaller, so tab 0 will stop here. Tab 1 will stop there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 50 to each previous tab to determine where to place the next tab. And here you can see the second tab, tab 1, is 150, so I added 50 to the previous one. All these tabs will measure from the left of the rich edit, and therefore the first one, tab 0, will be the smallest, and your last tab, in this case tab 3, your fourth tab, will be the largest. It is important that you set your tab stops after a dot clear, but before you display the headings or any output that needs to use the tab stops for the #9s, or they will not apply to the #9s that needs to follow. I suggest that you watch the 2D array video where we display our two-dimensional arrays in a rich edit first, because these just follow those same rules. We are displaying row by row when we are displaying in a rich edit, so therefore I start with a for loop with a row when I'm using a 2D array. And now I need to initialize each row, and I'm going to initialize it with the word terminal and then the number next to it so that I can have terminal 1, 2, and 3. My 2D array in this instance has 3 rows and 4 columns, as you can see in the declaration of this array. Inside of the for loop for the row, I then build my output string sline with the data from array acts code with iRow and iColumn in the square brackets, separating all the data with a hash line. And before I loop again, I'm going to display sline so that the next time that I'm looping, let's say I'm going to row 2 now, I will display terminal 2 and then build onto that all the activity codes for row 2 and then display it and so on. We now need to make use of the input of the user of which images they selected for the terminal and the direction. So the terminal, we have 3 terminals and that's our row, and then we have the direction and we have 4 directions and those would be our columns. According to the user input, we then require to display the heading to say which terminal and direction they selected. We will also use their selection for what is the row and the column to get the code and then use our one-dimensional arrays to determine which of the activities or facilities they will see in which order for their selection. Press pause and try it yourself. When I read through the question, I saw that getting the direction I needed to do more than once. And it's for that reason that I have used now pnum and in a function to get the direction. So pnum is a parameter that is received. I'm using my case statement to return north, south, east, or west to be able to display those. Another option would have been to use an array and declare your own array from 1 to 4 and then assign these values to that array. But I've just decided to use a function. So iDirection already has a value as well as iTerminal. And I'm using my getDirection function to return the direction that they picked. So it will either return a north, south, west, or east. And then I'm going to display in my rich edit the terminal number as they selected. This is the global variable and the values that were assigned to it according to what they clicked on with a comma and then the direction. Array act codes now holds the data for the activities that they would see as these codes, and I need to pick the correct one as per their selection. So I'm using the array act codes with the terminal they selected as well as their direction, and this was a string array, so therefore I've stored it as scode. Now what I'm doing is I'm looping from 1 to the length of this code. Here's an example of something that could be stored in scode. I'm sure these hardy-das can hear when I'm pressing record, because then they decide to chip in as well. There are more than one solution, but here is a very simple one. I'm going to go to each character in this code at the top. And let's say I am with K at position 1. That means that with scode, if I refer to scode K, I'm dealing with the W. I'm now looping with an inner loop from 1 to 10. And J is really looping through my array codes. Here are the codes it's looping through, so that would be my J. And if it finds a W, then I'm going to find array activities to display the correct name of the activity in array activities, because remember these two were parallel. So if I find the current code, for example, W, in array codes J, I'm going to display the corresponding activity in array activities J. Then I will loop again and I will deal with R because K would be 2 and S code 2 would be R, and I'm going to search through array codes for R, and once I find it, I display the corresponding activity. This was marked correctly, but it is not very efficient because every time I'm going to a new character, I have to loop through all of the codes to find the correct character. Even if I find W, for example, in position 1, I'm still looping through all 10. So it would be better, but in this instance, you didn't score more marks, to not use a for loop, but to rather use a while or a repeat loop, and to make the loop stop once you find the code. So what I have here is using a while loop to replace my for loop for J. I would still have my for loop for K because I do want to go to each character. This for loop will now have a begin and an end, and on the inside of that, I will place the following code. I'm going to assign bfind to false so that I can make my loop stop once I find the activity or the code. I don't have the for loop anymore, so I have to now initialize J. I have to make it stop at 10. So this means if I don't find it, which in this example won't be possible, but I am going to stop it if it reaches 10. But I will stop it once I find the activity because bfind will be changed to true, so bfind won't be false anymore, my while loop won't execute. Since I don't have the for loop, I now have to inc J. And what I'm doing is I'm using S code K. It's the same as this if statement here at the top. And I'm testing if it's equal to array codes J. So very similar to what we've done here at the top. Then I will display the corresponding activity in the parallel array activities. But I will also assign bfind to true, which would then make this while loop on the inside of the for loop for K stop once I find this activity. Remember, when we have while loops, we need to initialize, test, and change the same variable. Now, if you have more than one condition in your while loop, you need to make sure that both of these variables are changing inside of your while loop. They also both need to be initialized. So J and bfind are my two variables in my while loop heading. So I initialize bfind, I initialize J. Those are the two variables that I am testing, and those are also the two variables that I'm changing here. I'm changing J, and here I'm changing bfind. The same, however, is possible in a repeat loop, replacing the for loop for J, still having your for loop for K, but just replacing this part here with a repeat loop. Again, you will need a begin and an end for the for loop for K. My repeat loop will repeat until J is equal to 10, that's the last item in array codes, or it will repeat until bfind is true. I have set bfind to false and J to 0 and inking J as we did with the while loop. Testing the if statement and the output here is the same as both examples above, but we have to remember to change bfind to true as we did with the while loop to ensure that our repeat loop will stop once we find this code. What we are asked to do in button 3.3 is to find all the different terminals and directions of the activity that the user selects from the combo box. We also need to count the number of access routes leading to this activity. All activities are not in all of the rows and columns really of my 2D array, so we have to go and find them. Press pause and try it yourself. So here I'm getting input from the user from the item they selected from the combo box. And I'm using .item square bracket combo box .item index as I would for a radio group or a list box. The example of output is at the top of the rich edit. So for that reason, I have a dot clear and I'm displaying the activity at the top. Now, remember our item indexes start at 0. So should I add 1, I'm going to match my selection from my combo box with the index of array codes that the user selected. So let's say they are selecting C. This would be array activities 1, 2, 3. But in my combo box, that would be item index 0, 1, 2. For that reason, I'm adding 1. And that would find my code 1, 2, 3, and I'll have the S. Now I have the correct code stored in S code. And I am going to have to initialize iCount because I have to find the number of times that this code appears in my two-dimensional array. It doesn't really matter whether you're starting with a for loop for the row or the column because you are searching throughout the entire array. However, you will see that in the output that terminal 1 would be at the top. So for that reason, I started with a for loop for the row, so it would find all the items in row 1 first. Then, on the inside here of my for loop for the column, I've added a begin and end. It was possible to put all of this here in my pos, but I just thought I would help you by first assigning the code to S activity of each two-dimensional array. Here is an example of what is stored now in SACT, and what I'm looking for is I want to see if this code that I have stored from the user selection, does that appear in SACT? So therefore, if the position of the code in the activity is more than 0, then I need to display the direction, and here I'm using my getDirection function again. Using the column, that's a column value from 1 to 4, storing it here as sDirect, and then displaying the terminal number. Remember your terminals were in rows, so that's why I'm using our row here, plus my direction. Instead of sDirection, I could have also used my getDirection function in there, or if you had the direction stored in an array, you could have used your array here as well. Important now that you count them because you were required outside of the loop to display how many times this code appeared in your 2D array. If you have a look at the output or the example of output, you will see that after displaying the terminals and the directions that you have an empty line, and then below that you have number of access routes, and then that counter that you have counted inside of your for loops. What they have asked us to do here is that some routes or some activities rather could be cancelled, and if an activity has been cancelled, the user will select there from the combo box, and you have to remove this from your ArrayActs code so that when you are displaying the ArrayActs code here at the bottom, let's say diving was closed, you will not see the D anywhere in your two-dimensional array. So this is combining 2D arrays as well as string handling in this question. Press pause and try it yourself. At the top here, I am just storing the input from the user. I'm clearing the rich edit and displaying updated information. I could also see that there was an empty line below that. Then I want to store the code that the user selected by using the selection from the combo box, item index +1, same reason as before, and finding the code in array codes that way. This is the one that needs to be removed. I'm going to loop through all my activity codes in my 2D array, so for that reason it's not really important whether you start with a for loop for the row or the column. I just by default always start with a for loop for the row. And each time I'm looping, I'm going to store each activity code in SACT. And here I have array activity codes with my row and my column. The best way to remove any character from a string is to build a new string. So I am going to initialize snew because I'm using it on the inside of this if on both sides of the assignment statement. I need to initialize it. There's a loop. I'm going to initialize it above the loop. And what I'm doing is I'm building snew without the code that the user selected. So I'm looping with k from 1 to the length of the activity. And if the current character is not equal to the code that they selected, I will add it to snew. After this for loop, snew will now have the activity codes excluding the code they selected. Important to remember is that you want to update your two-dimensional array with this snew value that is the code without the one they selected, the one that was removed. So very important before the end of your for loop for the column is that you replace or overwrite the current code in the row and column with this new code. Then only do we loop again and we will start with the new code. And here's where my display procedure was very handy. I called it like this in question 3.1 and now I can just call it again without having to rewrite all that code to display the codes in the rich edit. That was the end of that question paper. Remember, practice, practice, practice. Don't just watch videos. You do need to do it yourself. If you need more information or explanations and activities on two-dimensional arrays, you can have a look at Dandelion Delphi Book 3. I would suggest that you first watch the other two-dimensional array videos if you haven't done so already, and then go and practice some of your past papers containing the 2D array questions. Thanks for watching, guys. Please leave some comments. Hope to see you soon.